software escrow is all about trust. We would build a huge underground vault. So he looked at us and he goes, you had so much ambition and you were so passionate about what you were presenting.
Evan Lever is the founder of the Escrow Company, a global leader in digital escrow for software, cloud, and IP. After a successful exit during the Israeli tech boom, he built the company in London, securing major clients like Pfizer, Deloitte, and Unilever, with operations now spanning London, Sydney, and Atlanta.
What happens if you go bust? And myself and Anthony, we hustled. We picked up the phone and called company after company. Taking investment, it seems like an attractive thing. I raised 2 million, I raised 5 million, fantastic. But that's not achieving anything besides getting money. He goes, hang on, let me make a phone call. Gets on the call, gets off the phone. He said, boys, you've got yourself a business.
And after the success of the acquisition, why did London seem like the next place?
I ultimately want to be in control. I don't want to have a board of directors above me. So the whole journey, I'm at the steering wheel. So London has this reputation of being somewhere that's stable, although it may not actually be the case, like politically and everything else.
Why would these big companies trust you two to take their data on tapes?
Right, Evan, can you just, before we dive into the subjects that we've got to cover, can you just explain to us what is software escrow?
Okay, so software escrow as a concept has been around for a long time. The concept of escrow is keeping something in trust, or holding something in trust. Now, often people think of escrow as holding money or holding title deeds in trust. Software escrow is the concept of holding digital assets in trust. So traditionally that would have been source code. So many years ago, companies got set up as a software escrow vendor, and they would hold primarily source code in trust. Now, why this would come about is you've got a software vendor on one side, maybe a scale-up, maybe a startup, who wants to license their software to an end user, maybe a bank or an insurance company or a large enterprise company. Now, the question that may be posed by the customer is, what happens if you go bust? How do we get our hands on the source code to continue to maintain this software into the future? So it's obviously a risk element for the enterprise company, the end user, that if something happens to the software vendor, that they need this code to continue to maintain their systems. Now, as things have evolved, software has moved from on-premise, now primarily hosted in the cloud or SaaS software. So that has also changed the picture of what software escrow is about. So software escrow today, especially hosted in the cloud, is not only about source code, because that's just one element. It can be things like databases, where in the old days, those would be hosted on-site or an on-site server, where now if they're hosted in the cloud, in the event something happens to the software vendor, the end user needs to access their data, so they need an access point to that, and escrow is one of the tools that can be used for access of data in the event something happens to a software vendor. And the other bits are potentially entire environments. So it could be an entire AWS or Azure environment, which can be stored in escrow, in trust, that could be released in the event of a trigger event. Further along, other solutions that we have in place, which are part of software escrow, is the holding of access credentials. So access credentials that could be used to access an AWS environment or Azure environment, which are production environments, could be very complex banking systems. The root access credentials to that environment can be stored in escrow and would only be released under specific conditions. So that generally covers the concept of what is software escrow.
So when identifying the problem, can you think of, or are there any sort of well-known or famous examples whereby something like this has happened, and had a software escrow been in place, it would have saved the day?
Well, we actually have a good example on our website, or it actually happened, where escrow was in place. And this was the case of a software escrow vendor, which was licensing software to an airline. It was an internet booking engine. Now, obviously to an airline, a booking engine is the most critical thing that they could have. The software vendor went bust. We had a replica of the production environment hosted by us, which we were able to spin up, and then that was brought live, managed by us, until a point that the airline was able to bring in their own software developers to take over the environment. So that's just one very clear example of if the airline didn't have something in place and the software vendor goes bust, think of the issues at hand.
So let's contextualize it a bit. What brought you into this space?
Okay, well, I think probably a good idea is to go to the very beginning. So I grew up in Australia. At the age of 24, I moved over to Israel. It was the time of a massive technology boom in Israel. Israel's a country of a lot of startups. There's a lot of software development in Israel, a lot of technology. It was an exciting place to be in the early 2000s. So this got me over to Israel. Unfortunately, the markets turned and there was the dot-com crash of the early 2000s, and ultimately I was caught up in that wave. So I got this job working graveyard shift in an online internet marketing company. It was no glamorous position. But there I met Anthony, and he's my business partner. He's a business partner in the Escrow Company, also was a business partner in the original business. And we got chatting through the night and we were talking about different business ideas. What could we do? We were young. I was 24 at the time. And he came up with an idea saying, well, I worked in a company in Australia and that concept doesn't exist in Israel. And what was the concept? At that point in time, companies would back up their data to backup tapes. So physical tapes look like a video cassette recorder tape. And ultimately, those backup tapes needed to be out of the building so that if something happened to the building, the company would be able to get access to their backups and recover. But in Israel, there was no formal solution for this. What would happen is IT managers would take their tapes home, or they would keep them on site in a safe, all the sort of stuff which wasn't very professional. This solution was we would build a huge underground vault where we would keep environmentally controlled conditions, very sophisticated fire systems, and would have vans driving around the country picking up backup tapes from companies. So I met an older guy who was looking to invest in companies at that time. And we presented the idea to him. And he said, it was a good idea, but I don't think people are going to trust you with their data. Like, who are you? Why would they give you your tapes? Go and speak to our accountant. So off we went to their accountant. Pitched the idea to him. He goes, oh, nobody's going to trust you with their data. Like, who's going to trust you? Two guys with their data. He goes, hang on, let me make a phone call. He gets on the call. He has a conversation. Gets off the phone. He said, boys, you've got yourself a business. So he was on the call to the IT manager of Lehman Brothers at the time. So this is before Lehman Brothers had folded. And she was like, oh my God, I need the service. Headquarters in New York are saying we have to use the service. It doesn't exist in Israel. Get these guys to call me ASAP. So that validated the idea immediately. We set up a vault in the basement of their building, of the investors' building, very much a bootstrap concept. And myself and Anthony, we hustled. We picked up the phone and called company after company. And what we discovered, which worked really well for us, and this ultimately works, the concept works anywhere, which is thinking, how do I get around gatekeepers? How do I get to the right person and have a meeting with them? And the idea is thinking out of the box. So the idea was basically we would call up IT managers in English. They had no ideas what we were talking about. And so I'm going to be in your office next week. Can I come and sit down with you and present what I do? I go, okay, because they didn't really understand what we were on about. And it was a bit too hard because English is their second language. So you got your calendar in front of you? Yeah, okay, I'll be there Tuesday, 2 o'clock, and we'd go and meet with them. 3 months after we kicked off, we had our first deliveries, and we had 4 companies at the time. One was Lehman Brothers, another one was Ernst & Young, another one was a company that was just acquired by Microsoft, and a 4th company. So it was a very interesting establishment to a business. We picked an area that there was a need, and basically we just took that opportunity. And why we got into it at the time, this is painting the context, was we were young and we had no other choice, because the other option was working in a really crappy job through the night and was like, well, let's do this. We're going to create this business, and then this is going to take care of our immediate employment issue, with the vision one day we'll grow this thing to being a massive business. And eventually it did become a large company. After about 13 years, we were acquired. At the point of sale, we had 2 massive underground vaults. We managed over 1 million backup tapes. Israel's like incredible in terms of IT. So you got like R&D centers of companies like Intel and Apple and I don't know, Facebook and Google, and they're creating immense amounts of data. And backup tape later on is last line of defense. So due to regulations, companies need to store data on tape. So that's where that came about. We sold the company. I stayed on as CEO for another 1.5 years, and I kept my eyes open. What's next? What other opportunities are there? And I set my eyes on the software escrow space. So software escrow, at that point in time, I noticed there weren't many major players globally. There was one major one in the US, there's another one in the UK. There weren't many players. And it just seemed very old school. They were storing source code on CDs in like a bank vault. And I was like, there has to be a better way. So I moved with my family over to London. We took time out, said, let's set up in London. And I looked at how we could differentiate ourselves. And what I could see happening at that point in time was cloud was coming over the horizon. So this was 10 years ago, 2015. And with that, I could see, well, companies are going to be adopting cloud-hosted solutions, and they're going to need more than source code sitting on a CD in a vault. They're going to need entire environments. They're going to need databases. So I established Escrow London, and that was the original name of the Escrow Company. We've just recently rebranded. And I set up a website and put various differentiating points of what we could do better. And one of the earliest things that we came up with was software vendors, and this I heard from my friends who are software developers, software vendors, saying, like, it's a pain in the ass to deal with software escrow companies. We have to burn these things to CD and then send them in the mail. And it's just like, surely there's a better way. We're all storing our code on Git repositories like GitHub and Bitbucket. And it's like, surely as a software escrow guy, you can pull that code directly from the repositories. So that was one of the first innovations that we did. It was like, okay, we need to automate this process and make life as easy as possible for the software vendors in terms of depositing. Because often what would happen previously, they would do an initial deposit of the code on CD, and then nobody would update it. But the code is being updated all the time. So under our model was one setup, it's set and then forget. So it's constantly running in the background, and every day we're pulling the latest release of code. So in the event something happens to the software vendor, the end user as the beneficiary can be assured the most recent set of code is always sitting in escrow. And with that, we can also rewind. So we can go back previous generations, previous versions, to find the most up-to-date version of code that applies to their system. So that sort of gets us to the beginning point.
I'm just wondering why you left Israel to London to do it. What I don't understand, because you were saying it was the place to be, right, for the tech boom, for a tech boom.
Yes.
And after the success of the acquisition, why did London seem like the next place?
It's a very good question. Now, software escrow is all about trust, right? You need to be a trusted vendor in a trusted location. And London is known as like the big insurance companies like Lloyd's of London. They're all based here. So London has this reputation of being somewhere that's stable. Although it may not actually be the case, like politically and everything else, but it's perceived from abroad as a very stable place. And that's where the name Escrow London came about. So my wife is originally from London. So we thought we'd take an initial gap here, see how things go. And it's actually a perfect location to run this sort of company. So London, in terms of as an international business, time zone wise, is fantastic, because in the same business day, I can get Australia in the morning or APAC in the morning, and by the late afternoon, I can capture the west coast of the US. Now, one of the challenges of running a global business is time zones. So being in the middle in London actually works really well. The UK, as far as software escrow goes, was one of the most advanced markets. So that was another reason of setting up here. And Israel's very good in terms of software companies or technology companies on the scale-up side, and then eventually they exit. And then it's global companies that acquire them. So it's your Apples, your Googles, your companies like that. And the decisions there are being either made from London or being made from the US. So headquarters of a lot of international corporate companies are based here. So we find it actually exceptionally advantageous to be based in the UK as a headquarters. So now as a business, we've actually grown, and about 5 years ago, we set up a North American entity, which is out of Atlanta. And last year, we opened an Australian entity out of Sydney. And that basically captures the entire world, which provides its own challenges, but provides a huge amount of opportunity as well.
If you've taken something from this, an insight you've used or could have used to refine, design, or scale your business, hit subscribe.
Ironically, because this is free, most people won't.
Studies show that if we charged even £1, you'd be more likely to take action because you'd feel the value.
But we don't do that. So if this helped you, that one click of support helps us to keep doing it and continue delivering business insights every week.
Okay, so if we can talk about then the founding team of the Escrow Company. Once you'd moved to London, you described setting up the website and a few key features about what your company was going to do. How did you decide who to build that company with from the early days?
Okay, so as original partners, Anthony, my business partner from DataBank, we made a decision with each other that we'll go in together with different ventures that we get involved with. We actually together set up a video conferencing company in Israel that he oversees, and I oversee the Escrow Company. One of the challenges that we came in the early days was, and bringing back to that element of trust, I set up a snazzy website. It looks professional, but the question will be asked by customers is who's behind this? So I'm here, I'm dealing with Evan, nice guy. How can I, back to that original point, how can I trust you with my data? And it became even more of a challenge here in a country or a business environment which is traditionally relatively risk averse. So your corporates, they have a lot of due diligence processes and things like that. And that became our first hurdle, our first stumbling block. So what I realized very early on was I needed some level of long-term UK credibility behind me. I've got a friend, his name is Paul, and he was running a data storage company. It was his own company up in the north of England. It was a records management company. And I approached him, I said, I've got a great idea. Like, we've put the website out, we're getting inquiries, but I feel that the fact that we don't have any longevity behind us is hindering our success and growth. How about we partner up together? We present ourselves as part of your organization. We use your resources to store the initial data, to handle all the ISO certifications, security, compliance. And with that, you become a partner in the company. So immediately by doing that, Paul came on board, or his company came on board. And then when early customers are asking questions, or how can we trust you with our data? Well, as an organization, the backbone of the business has been around for over 20 years, servicing many of the largest banks in the UK. We've got ISO certifications, our processes are audited, and that worked in the beginning. So it enabled us to get our first few large name clients, some of the big insurance companies onboarded with us at that time. And that enabled us essentially, without a massive investment, to build that level of trust that would otherwise take many more years to be in that position. So sort of fast-tracked that early adoption phase. Later on, once we had those solid clients behind us, we'd been operating for a number of years, we then went and put in our own ISO certifications, implemented our own employees to handle various aspects, took internally all the aspects of data storage and risk and compliance. So now it's all entirely managed in-house.
It's a very clever thing that you did with the strategic partnerships to establish a longevity in the UK. I think it was a very good point, a good strategy to undertake. Do you mind me asking in detail, would you recommend to a founder who's looking to do the same thing, how do those kind of commercial agreements actually look? You know, when you partnered with him, did it work on a kind of revenue split of new customers, or did they take equity in the business? Because those things always sound quite good, but they're quite hard to pull off in actuality. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think it was advantageous because it did fast track our growth. That specific agreement was worked out on equity, an equity stake in the business and a partnership in the business. In addition to that, Paul's got immense experience in doing business in the UK. So when I first arrived in the UK, I found the approach to business very different to what I had seen in Australia and what I'd seen in Israel. It's a lot more conservative. It's very hard to sort of read people. Later on, I learned how to do it. But one of the first painful experiences I had was nobody would answer their phone in the UK. Or
it's actually offensive to ring someone in the UK.
I discovered this thing called ghosting, where you'd have a fantastic conversation with somebody. Oh, I love your service. I'm going to 100%. We're going to place an order tomorrow. You never hear from them again. So a friend of mine who also does business here, also from Australia, we call them whack-a-moles. That you just have to like. Eventually they pop up and you have to get them. So yeah, it's you need and. I'd say in any sort of business you get involved with, it's always advantageous to have mentorship from somebody who's been there before, has seen the movie before, that can sort of show you the direction, so you're not making mistakes that otherwise you would make. You always make mistakes in business, but try to reduce the number of mistakes that you do make.
Despite your personal successes prior to the Escrow Company's formation, how did you manage the fine art of prioritizing a limited budget?
So I'm always one of these people that keeps businesses lean. I don't believe in extravagant things like extravagant offices or extravagant cars or things like that. So when we ran DataBank, we operated extremely leanly. We were a relatively large business. We had a team of over 50 people, but our actual operating offices were tiny. They were probably about the size of this room. And it was like, because I didn't see value in having extravagant offices. We just needed a place we could work. I could take calls in private, but I didn't need to be showy. So that's one of the key things I've always believed in, which is keeping things lean, because then when times get tough, let's say you hit into a recession or you lose a large customer, you're not suddenly having to make massive cuts. So that's one of the key things that I believe in, which is keep things lean, which ultimately enables you to bootstrap. And the other element around that is I often see with startup founders, and they get all excited. Hey, I've got myself a business and I've got investment or whatever it is. But the one thing that you need to understand is the business money is your money. So don't come in thinking, the business will pay for it. The business will pay for my new iPhone Pro, or the business will pay for my car lease, because at the end of the day, it's your money, or it may be your investor's money, but that money is going to run out. So I think that's one of the big pieces of advice that I can give to you is think of company money as your own money and really examine your expenses.
So you've spoken about perhaps where you would choose not to spend your money, but in those early days, where did you prioritize your spend?
We set up this website but we don't have traffic. How do you get traffic? Google AdWords. So only later on you get SEO and you get organic searches. But in order to validate your business, and this was a trick I've encouraged many other entrepreneurs to do, is set up a website. It doesn't have to be brilliant. It doesn't have to be perfect. But see if you even get traffic. Are people clicking on your ad and your link? Is it relevant? Before you jump into the big blue sea and set up a company and lease your first offices. So yeah, with that in mind, their expenditure on, say, Google ads was an important aspect because I needed the traffic, which would then convert into inquiries, which would then convert into leads. So I'd say that was, for me personally, a primary expense.
If we talk about first customer acquisition, I've got two things I'd like to ask you about. The first is building on that, prioritizing where you spend money. When you're building a website to see if you get inquiries and things like that, have you yet at that stage actually incorporated the company, or are you in fact leading with the website and the kind of market testing before even setting up the commercial entity?
Yeah, so what I did there was I first set up a website, and you can use outsourcers like on Upwork. It will cost you a few £100 to set up. Get a website, basic website set up. Once I saw validation, I had customer inquiries, I then went and incorporated the company and went through the legal costs of shareholder agreements and things like that. So that's a very, very early stage. Trying to keep costs as minimal as possible while validating the idea. And another point that I'll get into in terms of where expense is necessary, which is your legals, especially for us in a business which is built up around a legally binding agreement. Find yourself a great lawyer who understands you, understands your business, and ultimately is pragmatic. And we've worked with a fantastic solicitor for many years from the very beginning, who really understands our business. And it is so helpful because often what I see with lawyers, you have deal breakers and you have deal makers. And I want to work with a deal maker.
That makes sense. I mean, it's a small nuanced difference, isn't it, setting up a website before the company, but it's actually quite crucial because in the UK, for example, it's only £14 to register a company on Companies House. Yeah. But if you register a company every time you run an experiment, you can find yourself in a bit of a admin pickle in the UK. And I know it happens to a lot of young founders where they feel like I have an idea, so they set up an incorporated company before they find the market testing. Okay, so let's move on to the first customer acquisition. You mentioned that when you were in Israel setting up DataBank, you were in the conversation with the investor and he asked, why would these big companies trust you two to take their data on tapes? What was the reason that they chose to trust you out of interest? Was it just driven out of pure demand?
So in that circumstance, it was driven out of demand because they needed this solution. It didn't exist. And ultimately, the other option was taking it home, which was extremely risky. Now, again, there, what we did, we set up the business under our investors. So they were in the same building, and we presented ourselves as a daughter company of their company that had been around at the time for 25 years or something. So again, it was that same model of leveraging credibility of our founders, our founding partners at that time. But yes, building that level of trust it's an important aspect. They feel they can trust you with their data or their company assets or whatever it may be. Again, there later down the line, we then went and got our own certifications and stuff like that. But we started off by having a backbone. Later on, at the very end, after we had sold out of the business, we did a video for one of the anniversaries of the company, and I got in the original customer number one, and I asked him, okay, myself and Anthony, we came and sat in your office, it was 13 years ago, saying, I've got this idea, we're going to take these tapes and store them in a vault. He goes, why? Why did you trust us? So he looks at us and he goes, because you guys, you had moved to a new country, you had so much ambition, and you were so passionate about what you were presenting. I had these tapes sitting in my house. It was risky enough as it was. It was like, why not give these two guys a go? And it was that essentially that drove him to give us a chance. And I think that's an element for other entrepreneurs that I always recommend is don't be afraid to like ask questions. So if you're speaking to a new client who's giving you the business, ask them if they know anybody who a colleague of theirs in another company who may find this useful. And one of the very important elements that the message I get across, it doesn't matter if it's here or Israel or the US, people like to help people. And if they feel they're helping you, then they feel good about it. And that can get you on your way, on your journey. So I think an element of there is, as a new entrepreneur, is just don't be shy.
Okay, and so when you set up the Escrow Company in the UK and you had major strategic partnerships, looking back, what do you think was the one key factor that helped you secure your first paying customer?
So I think thereabouts in the early days, one of the premises we went on was, okay, we're disruptors. We're new to the market. Our pricing was lower than our competitors at that point in time. So we used price sort of as an advantage, as a sweetener to get them across. We presented that we're credible and that we were keeping the data in very high level of security. And we had shifted to this online approach of deposits. So this was an attraction. It was a draw card to them. It was, hey, these guys obviously are thinking more than send me your data on a CD. They're thinking out of the square here. They're looking at how can they make this process more efficient, better. So I believe that's where we won the initial clients. And also it didn't take a huge amount of time from setup to winning the initial clients. So I think I started marketing like the concept of the website maybe in September of 2015, and probably around March of 2016, we had the first signed customer. In terms of a big name client, when I was just looking through my records, we had clients like Vodafone and Munich Re in early 2017. So they saw our proposition, what we had presented to them at that point in time, and they were like, hey, this actually looks good for us. We're looking for something more SaaS orientated that ticks the box. Now, one of the key things in the escrow business, and one of the main reasons that there's not many competitors globally in this business, is it's all built on trust, and it takes time to build that level of trust. You have to lay the foundations, you have to get the credibility, which is A, having all the certifications in the world, but B, it's longevity. So now that we've been around for 10 years, the questions are no longer asked, are you just a flash in the pan and new startup? It's like, you guys have been around 10 years, like you're obviously serious players in the market, and we are today, and we win deals all the time over our competitors. And the growth now is exploding, which is the most exciting bit about it. So you have your early foundation, which you hustle, and then as time goes on, it becomes a lot easier to win the big contracts.
When you founded the Escrow Company, as I've said, and as you've discussed in detail, you were coming off the back of an acquisition. You came over and you did some market testing and it was going positively. It seems like at that point in time, you would have been in a perfect position to raise money, but instead you chose to remain bootstrapped. Why is that?
So at that point in time, I felt I didn't need investment. So either you need investment because you need the cash, which we didn't need, or you need investment for the expertise, which between us and our founding partners, we've got the expertise in running businesses. I didn't need a mentor to show me how to run a company. I already knew how to run a company. So with that in mind, and also I believe that without taking investment and diluting our equity, that we could grow this ourselves organically. And I really believe, and I believe it's true, that an injection of cash wouldn't have helped the speed up of client acquisition, because of what I just said earlier, was this sort of business takes a long time to build because it's built on trust and longevity. So you could chuck, I don't know, £2 million in advertising. Doesn't mean you're going to capture the market, because clients on the other end, when they're enterprise clients, they want to see who your clients are, how long you've been in business. They always send these due diligence audits, which you have to go through. So I don't believe a massive investment would have helped. I've had a lot of offers of investment, but I've turned them down. And in addition to that, I ultimately want to be in control. I don't want to have a board of directors above me who tell me I can do this, do that, I can't take leave here, or I need to do this. So the whole journey, I'm at the steering wheel, and that's where I want to be. And I believe for other entrepreneurs, taking investment, it seems like an attractive thing. Hey, I raised 2 million, I raised 5 million, fantastic. But that's not achieving anything besides getting money. That's not a great victory, because then you have to go about and building your business. And now you're building your business with, essentially you've got another boss who's in control of you, but with a huge amount more pressure on top of you to see results. And some VCs, or private equity for that matter, they may not be as patient as time would require. So in our sort of business, which is the escrow company or the escrow industry, and I just keep saying is not something you can just build overnight. I imagine if we took investment, our investors would have been frustrated in the early days by saying, oh, what's happening? Why aren't you getting 1,000 customers a year on board? Where it's just simply unrealistic due to the nature of the industry.
Let's talk about managing finances. So you decided to run the business as a bootstrapped business, privately funded. When you're working day to day, is there any practices that you adopt and that you might recommend to other founders for managing finances?
Very good question. And it's something that often founders don't even think about, which is things like cash flow. And I remember in the very early days of DataBank, I went to a conference and I met a guy from a records management company. I think he was based in Dublin. And I was telling him of our business model, and we're invoicing all our customers monthly. And he goes, why don't you invoice your customers like quarterly in advance as opposed to monthly in arrears? And I was like, hey, why don't we do that? And then I've adopted that model for our other businesses that we've got involved with, which is invoicing in advance. So with the escrow business, or the escrow company, we invoice annually in advance for most things. Now, what that helps is massively with cash flow. Our business has zero cash flow issues because our customers are paying in advance. Now, they may have payment terms of 30 days or 60 days or whatever it may be. But I'm invoicing once a year. So my invoicing process is less invasive in terms of the day-to-day operations of the business, as opposed to somebody who may be invoicing on a monthly basis. And then my collections is a lot easier because I'm collecting on an annual basis. So let's say a customer's late in payment. I just have to contact him once a year as opposed to every month if he's late every month in paying their bills. So that's a very important aspect, which is around the cash flow side. The other element is looking at expenses. And we've chatted about this already, which is keeping your expenses low, which I've always been very passionate about. To just not go over the top with expenses. Also with flashy offices. Don't need flashy offices. Co-work spaces in terms of shared offices is a very economical way of not taking commitment of a long-term lease. The amount of founders I've seen that they get a cash injection and say, we're going to sign a lease on a property for 3 years. And either that property becomes too big or too small, and they're with it for 3 years. So with co-work spaces, up to a team of, if you're always in the office, say 6 people, it's probably more economical than taking a long-term lease. And you're not worried about running the actual office, so the internet and the cleaning and all that. That's just all outsourced, so you can focus on running your business. So I believe it's a worthwhile place to place extra funds. A lot of companies you can operate remotely as well. So even today, many people just don't go into an office. So it's another area of saving on costs. And then the other element as well, which I've also talked about previously, is using platforms like Upwork to find resources which may be in the Philippines where they've got fantastic level of English and can do graphic design or website design, which is another way of just keeping costs low until you're at a position that you can afford to use maybe somebody who's more local in the same time zone, so you're then paying a bit more for that.
And if you don't mind, just before we finish this section, when you talk about the invoicing structure that you changed, where you charge people ahead of time in advance, of course, most businesses would love to have their invoices paid in advance. Did you find any pushback from certain customers to that change in billing? And, if someone's listening to you and the success of that billing style, is there anything that they should be mindful of if they're going to introduce that style to their business?
So when you shift any model from one model to another model, people hate change. So you're going to get pushback. So we had a few clients that complained about it. So, okay, we'll keep you on monthly billing. But by and large, most customers didn't care. And all new customers coming on board, that's just how we operate. Quarterly in advance. Or for the Escrow Company, annually in advance. Now, it's in your agreements. And then also when you're dealing with, say, an enterprise company, it also depends on who your client is. If you're selling to enterprise, paying a bill on an annual basis also for them is less administration internally. So they're going to have that expense anyway. It's going to come on their balance sheet anyway. So it just sort of alleviates that issue for them. The only potential hurdle there is if there is a cancellation and potentially you may have to refund unused portion of those fees. So we do allow for that if it's requested, that we'll refund for the period that wasn't used for unused services.
I want to talk about brand building and brand authority. You've mentioned that you have a couple of competitors in this space, and I want to know what strategies you found most effective in building the Escrow Company's credibility.
So for us, in the beginning, the company name was the Escrow London. And for me there, the credibility was we're based in London. Now, as time has gone on and we become more of an international business, we realized about 18 months ago, it was important for us to rebrand because specifically in the US, they were getting confused by this name Escrow London. Hey, you in the US and you're Escrow and you're in London, I don't really understand. So at that point, we decided to switch to the rebrand as the Escrow Company. So we initially trialed it in the US and has been now operating under that brand for over a year. And we saw it was very successful. And now as a global brand with an entity in the UK, Australia, and the US, we realized we need to unify under one brand, which is the Escrow Company. And for us, that's an important, it's an important brand image to stand by, which is solid company with one unified brand. And in the title, in the branding, it says what we do. We are the Escrow Company. In terms of differentiating ourselves from our competitors, a lot there was built around innovation, and we see ourselves as the innovators. We ultimately can be a lot more responsive. So we're smaller than them, which also means we're more agile, we're more nimble. If we have an inquiry from a customer, can you do this? We can jump on it and look at how we can do this without going through a layer of management to seek approval, And that really has helped us. So definitely what I would recommend to any other entrepreneur, like if you're getting into a business, is that sort of level of responsiveness when you're competing against bigger players definitely can help you win deals, which is the idea of just being first to the market, first to respond. And it's a value that we instill across our sales team, which is just be responsive. If a customer sends you an email, respond straight away. People love it when you get a response straight away, that you know that they care about you, that even if the answer is, I'm going to look into it.
And how about personal branding? And I mean it in the sense of thought leadership. Have you utilized that from a personal capacity to help get the brand awareness out for the Escrow Company?
Yeah, so what I found, which is very important to the business, which is it's an industry that not many people know about. So we need to raise awareness, and we need to look into markets that are potentially untapped, where they don't even realize there is a potential use case for software escrow. And we've been done exceptionally well into tapping into these markets. And what we do is we educate the market by running things like legal masterclasses. So we go into the major law firms, and I run a session, or somebody else in our organization will run a session around SaaS escrow, or the use of software escrow in SaaS license agreements. So we're passing on our knowledge and thought leadership to the wider legal community. So it's an important area because these guys are reviewing software license agreements, SaaS license agreements. So that's an important exercise which I'm doing in terms of building my element of thought leadership. And the other area is industry associations. So for example, Tech UK in the UK, it's all sorts of fintech groups, insurtech groups. And I've made it a point to write articles and present these, which they will often publish or bring me on board on a panel. And it shares that message over here in the UK, in Australia, the US, and all through Europe, over the elements of what we're on about, which is making the adoption of software, especially hosted in the cloud, more palatable, easier for enterprise companies. And on the flip end, with software vendors, which may be startups or scale-ups, making it easier for them to sell into these larger organizations like enterprise and government if they come along with an answer to that question, well, what happens if you go bust? So there's always this whole concept of nobody ever gets fired for buying IBM, but you can get a lot more efficiency in a business if you're adopting a technology from potentially a smaller company. So the end user needs to take risk, and we assist with mitigating this risk.
Let's talk about company culture. You've described the Escrow Company as being lean and agile, but at the same time, you're breaking into lots of different international markets. So you have a remote-based team, apart from the team you have here in the UK. How do you manage to maintain a cohesive company culture while breaking into multiple international markets?
Okay, so company culture is important, and it is extremely challenging to get that company culture where people are working across multiple time zones in various different regions. So one of the areas that we do is every couple of weeks, we do a company-wide meeting. We give updates of what's going on within the business. Just last week, we did a sales offsite in San Diego where we brought the sales team together in San Diego. So our sales guys from Australia, from the UK, and the US all met together in San Diego, which was a few days of brainstorming, coming together, not only for training and education, but also to bond, which I feel is an important aspect that you miss by not all being in the same office. So in terms of culture, what we're about is, bottom line, is about trust. So I'm not a micromanager. I can't be a micromanager. And you can't be a micromanager managing a team spread across the world. I've built around me a great leadership team who also have those same values that I have in the business. And they also don't micromanage. So we instill power to our team, whether they are in delivery, operations, or in sales, to make decisions, or to say to the client, let me check and I'll get back to you. But they have a lot more authority in making decisions in terms of their day-to-day, that they don't have to keep asking. So that's one of the things I really want and encourage our team, was to ask questions in terms of look up things for yourself. We've got a lot of internal documentation about the services and what we offer, but also go out to Google or ask AI a question, not about a specific client of ours, but ask the question like, what is an EC2 instance, for example, or what is an RDS database, whatever it is. So I really encourage people to be inquisitive and to further educate themselves. So if any of our guys comes along and says to me, hey, I really want to do a course in Microsoft Azure, 100% we'll pay for it, because I want our team to have that understanding, that education for their own professional growth, that they have those opportunities to learn and grow. So in terms of company culture, and this I presented at our team session in San Diego last week, we're about 5 key things. I'm going to try to remember what they are. But ultimately, number one is about trust. So we're all about trust. So our customers have to feel that they can trust us and that you come across as somebody who's trustworthy and you're going to stand by your word. The next word is expert, that you're an expert in the industry. So we are experts in software escrow, and we're even more experts or bigger experts in SaaS escrow, which is around the software escrows of things hosted in the cloud, that we really know our stuff. And customers feel that when they speak to our team, they feel that they're dealing with people that know what they're talking about and aren't going to oversell them a service that they don't need, which is something I'm also passionate about, that you really need to understand their requirement and understand their budget instead of just trying to sell them the Rolls Royce when they can afford the Toyota. The other area is around responsiveness, which is, as I've said earlier, just being responsive to your clients, always being on the ball and being there for your client when they need you. And the other element, which is around security. So we're a security company as well. And you want to give that element of value to your clients, that we stand by what we do. We take security extremely seriously, and we take the security of their data extremely seriously. And the final one, which is probably a word you haven't heard about, maybe you have, which is a Yiddish word called mensch. Have you ever heard of a mensch?
I was at a Jewish wedding recently where the groom kept getting called a mensch.
There we go. A mensch is a Yiddish word for somebody who's does the right thing, who's honest, reliable, you can trust that person. And I want that as the image of our company, is that our clients know that we are menschers, that we're good people to do business with. Because in the end of the day, business is done person to person. And we win contracts because our sales team form brilliant bonds with our clients. And they always exclaim to us, sometimes when I get on a call, it's like, wow, Nathan was such an incredible insight into what you guys do. I came in to knowing we needed to put software escrow in place. I didn't know where to look. And he walked me through, he held my hand as we went through this process. We've never done escrow before. And it was very clear and evident in what you were providing after understanding the explanation behind that. And in addition to that, transparency is a very important thing about what we do. And it's important that our customers feel that we're not hiding certain setup fees or other figures or or things like that, that the fee that they get quoted is the fee that they're going to pay.
Businesses seem very ready to incorporate AI into their product. Whether it's suitable or not is a different question, but I want to know, in terms of software escrow, where does AI fit into that?
So there's a few areas. So AI, as in AI models, they can be put into escrow. So essentially it can be a database or software or code that can be escrowed. So that's one element. The other area, people love the buzzword of AI, and in terms of the service we're providing, a lot of what we're providing is a legal contract, which is a legally binding contract between typically three parties, which is the software vendor, the end user as the beneficiary, and us as the software escrow vendor. Now, so much of what is being done there is lawyers to lawyers fighting over the terms, which may be release events. Like, what considers a release event where the code is going to be released? Is it only insolvency of a company? Is it potentially where the CEO dies? Or it could be anything. It could be the cat being run over by a car. It could be a release event. But the lawyers negotiate that backwards and forwards. Potentially in the future, AI is going to be arguing those points between each other. But a lot of this, there's a lot of nuances involved in a software escrow agreement that I believe makes it quite difficult for AI to be making decisions, because you're just pulling from one party against the other party. The other area, which often is not thought about, but is a potential risk in terms of using AI in business, which is using AI to, say, monitor conversations, monitor Zoom calls or things like that, which we won't do. We don't allow it in our business, because potentially you're in breach of your non-disclosure agreement with clients. So often with our agreements with our clients, we're signing NDAs, and you're forbidden by passing any information to any third parties. Now, if you have a transcribing service sitting up in the cloud, you have no idea who's getting access to that information. A lot of it extremely sensitive. So as a business decision, we ban AI from the use of transcribing or putting any customer information into AI. It's not happening.
Do you have any advice that founders should consider when thinking about incorporating AI into their business?
So I think there is, just in terms of incorporating AI, is really understand, what are you doing? Where is the data sitting? Who's got access to that data? Because that data could be very sensitive. It could contain your client's information, which they may not want that to be sitting on a cloud, sitting hosted somewhere that some other organization may have access to. So I think it's very important to think about AI. There's a lot of efficiencies that come from AI, but definitely give thought into what are the potential risks associated with using AI.
When we talk about paid advertising, you've already mentioned how you used Google Ads in the very early days to establish whether people were actually interested in the service you were providing. What's your approach to advertising nowadays? Has it changed much since the early days of Google Ads, and how do you spend your advertising money?
So in terms of advertising, Google Ads is obviously the most common. We use it, all our competitors use it. But what's most important for me is to be number one position on organic Google. So we invest a lot in getting ourselves to that position. The other area that we believe in investing money in is partnerships with other industry organizations, because I believe it's helpful to our business to educate the wider community in what we do. In terms of things like LinkedIn advertising, it's extremely expensive, and for us personally, not very effective. And then there's other areas like Facebook advertising and Instagram or TikTok, which is, I don't believe, relevant to our sort of industry, which is business to business in data security side. So I don't think that's a valid area. And what I found hasn't been effective, and I wish wasn't the case, was exhibiting at events. So having like a booth at a data security conference or things like that. You spend a good few days at those boos, you may get a bunch of leads. Often they don't turn into anything. So I think money can be better spent outside of those sort of events. I do find very useful speaking opportunities, speaking engagements, and that comes from thought leadership. So if you've got a good story and you've got a compelling use case in terms of what you do, which is educating a market, I believe that is advantageous in getting the brand out there.
Yes, we always touch on personal well-being and burnout because a recent study showed that over 45% of founders have experienced it at some point during their entrepreneurial journey. Would you mind sharing some details about how you manage founder burnout and your well-being?
Okay, so as a founder, you can't go into your business as thinking it's a 9-to-5 job. It's not. It's ultimately 24/7. I'm not talking working 24/7. What I'm talking is you need to be thinking about it available 24/7 ultimately, because at the end of the day, the buck stops with you. Now, burnout is a massive issue. And what I feel is important is to take time out during the day. So for example, I could be walking my dog at 10 in the morning, but I could be on a conference call at 10 at night. So it's taking that time out during the day, if you're working into the evening, but take time for yourself and do things like go to the gym. Maybe first thing in the morning, go to the gym. I personally play a lot of pickleball, like that's my new obsession. But it gets my mind off business because I'm focused on pickle. And it's having that breathing space. Now, the other area and it's the advantage of being a business owner, is you can control your own time and leave and things like that. Now, for example, we're an international family. My family's all in Australia. As a family, we do a lot of traveling. But my family knows traveling involves me working for a certain amount of each day, but that enables us to go away for longer. And even when on holiday, my laptop's always with me. And I'll be responding I'll take, say, 4 hours out of the day or 3 hours in the morning to respond to emails, review contracts. But it means I'm never taking a full vacation and switch off, and I don't believe you can as a owner of a company. So very much, I think it's about taking time for yourself during the week, weekends as well. One of the things one of my best mates to me, very successful entrepreneur, said to me, you can look him up, his name's Idor Leffler. What he said to me is, don't use your weekends for doing chores and errands. Use your weekend for relaxing, for going out for lunch or dinner with friends, for spending time with your kids. Don't spend that time working. And I think that's an important aspect as well. Like, you're not entirely switching off, but things can wait until Monday, until you've got a little block of time to respond to something. But I think that's an important lesson in life, is very much enjoy your weekends before you get back into the week.
How does your mindset with taking time out translate to your employees? You know, every founder wants to have A-team employees, and one of the characteristics of an A-team employee is someone who doesn't just think about work 9 to 5. You know, they take their work home and they think about it, and they don't mind getting the laptop open at the weekend. Do you ever have to just say, hang on a minute, you need to watch yourselves and make sure that you're taking enough time to rest?
Yeah, so I think that comes down to company culture as well. And it comes down to the whole concept of micromanaging, which I don't believe in. So, for example, when we're dealing with the sales team across the world from morning to night, I've often said to our CRO, like, you need to take some time off for yourself during the day, because you're going to burn out if you're working till 10 at night or a call till 1 in the morning, and then you're back on again at 9. It's not sustainable. So it is important to get that message across. But also with that value, what we do see is that the employees in the business, they also look at it as their own business, their own company, that they're doing the best for the business. And often when on leave, they may respond to an email or forward the email for somebody else to respond to, but it's all down to that values that we're all in it for the common good of the business. And I'm very much about cooperation with each other and collaboration, and that way we all succeed.
If we talk about long-term strategy, I look at the Escrow Company. You set up in 2015, you've secured massive clients, you've had multiple offers of investment which you've turned down. Your growth is now skyrocketing, and so inevitably you'll be offered probably offers to purchase the company. It's hard to know what will actually happen, but how should a founder listening position themselves? What mindset should they adopt? When's the right time to sell a business?
So in the life cycle of every entrepreneur's journey, you set up a company with the aim that one day you're going to monetize this business. Now, monetize can mean a few things. So monetize, firstly, can mean selling the business. It can mean taking large dividends and having a more comfortable life and enjoying some of life's more luxuries, or buying a house or investments or properties and things like that. Another area could be monetizing your time. So you can put a strong management team in place and take things a bit easier, or it could be selling the company. Now, for me personally, in terms of the way I look at things, in the life cycle of a business, you've got the initial stage, which is the validation. So we've ticked that box. You then have the early stage growth, which is getting those first customers on board. And that for me is like the most exciting time, is when you set up a company and you start getting these inquiries from big banks or big insurance companies or well-known companies. And then you prove yourself. And that takes a number of years, that you've proved yourself as a credible organization, companies take you seriously, and then you get into the stage we're in now, which is what I call hypergrowth. And that's really the most exciting stage. So that's where the growth of the company is exploding. We're winning amazing large contracts with really impressive organizations. They're on our website, you can see them. There's companies like TK Maxx or Five Guys or Kroger in the US or Rabobank, all very well-known international brands, have looked at us and said, you've got a very compelling business model and we want to do business with you. So for me, that's like the stage I want to be really involved in. And then as time goes on, the business matures. So I think firstly in our business, there's still a lot of untapped opportunity and untapped markets that we're exposing at the moment who previously haven't seen a use case for software escrow, that are now saying, hey, wait a second, we can adopt this into our business. Our business becomes more resilient and it enables us to adopt technology that makes us more efficient. Hey, this is brilliant. And I love seeing that light bulb moment where people really understand what we do. And that's at the position that we're in now. And as an example, I'll just give you like that light bulb moment. We had a client in Australia, and we've just done a case study with them, which is the Royal Sydney Easter Show. It's like this massive fair that happens on an annual basis. It's a fixed thing in the Sydney calendar. Every kid in Sydney goes to this event. They get around 1 million visitors over a period of 12 days to this event. And these guys were putting in a digital payment system. And they were looking for a software vendor to provide them resilience should something happen to the software vendor. As you can imagine, with an event like this, their software is critical. They can't afford to have 2 days of an outage. So software escrow came onto the table, and they went to market and they surveyed a number of different software escrow vendors, and they selected us. It wasn't on price. It was on relationship in terms of how we presented our product to the IT leadership team. And they signed with us and we implemented the service with them. But the head of operations of the Sydney Royal Easter Show was so happy by the process and what he gained out of it, because it was the first time that he had done escrow. He agreed to do a case study, which further validates what we're doing is we're doing something really well. Our customers are seeing it, and it's working, and we're winning these sort of contracts over our competitors. And that's where the exciting stage to be in. Now, moving forward, every entrepreneur at some point looks at exiting. Like it's the dream that one day you've grown this business and then somebody comes on and gives you an offer you can't refuse, and you eventually have to say goodbye to your baby. And I think for me, it's the point where I get itchy feet, that I've thought, I've done everything I can in this business. I've secured every client that I could possibly do. I've grown it to the point that can't be grown further, and I want to do it all again, which is what I did last time. I said goodbye to a team of 50 people, and suddenly I'm sitting there by myself in an office by myself saying, how are we going to do this? And that's what I find most exciting, and most entrepreneurs find exciting, which is not running a stable, mature business. Like, that's for management teams to run. It's the coming up with idea, validating it, and winning new clients.
And when you described the journey of a founder, you talked about how it's exciting to get those first few inquiries. It's even more exciting when you're in that hyper growth stage. What's it like? How does it compare to those moments to sell the business?
So it's a weird thing when you sell a company, because it's been your baby and you've been growing it and everything like that. And then you get to the position where you've got a buyer who comes along and says, I want to buy your baby. And then you go through a whole process of due diligence where they look inside every closet to see any skeletons and everything like that. And you go through a whole legal process and everything else. And then the deal happens. And then you suddenly look around and go, wow, was that the right thing for me? Was it the right thing to sell the business? Now, in terms of data bank, for me personally, it was the right thing to do at that point in time. There was still a lot of potential growth on the table, but for me, my entire sort of life assets were tied up in this business. So by monetizing that business, by selling, I then put myself into a financial position where ultimately for the rest of my life, I was secure. And that's a great position to be in. At the time I was 39, that I'm pretty financially stable, or actually very financially stable. And then I can go about doing other things. And over time, we've done other things. We've done this venture in Israel, which on video conferencing. We've done the escrow business. We had a co-work space in Israel, which we later sold. We've bought property, both residential and commercial, and it opens up a whole lot of other new options that I'm able to explore. So yeah, when the timing is right, the timing is right. For me, it's not yet, because there's so much more to do.
Yeah, sure.
But who knows what will be in the future.
Evan, that has been an absolute pleasure talking to you and understanding a bit and getting your insights. And I just want to say thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Great to meet you guys, and all the best.